Hello, welcome to the Formula 3 post-season data analysis, the deep dive into the data. Now, the best way to understand what goes on in a series like Formula 3 or Formula 2 is to analyse the data. So what is the data that we have here? So firstly, this here is the qualifying times from the season. There were 10 rounds, and this is the gap to pole, all these numbers here. So in the first race, Alex Dunn was 0.702 seconds behind pole. Now, when we average out all the different times, we get this value here in the averages column, and the most interesting column is the adjusted column, because what happens is no driver is on pole every race. So that means that every driver has a value greater than 0, but the fastest driver is adjusted. So that means that the fastest driver, which happens to be Leonardo Fornaroli, now his average time behind pole is 0.257 of a second. So about quarter of a second, but there's no one in front of him. He is the fastest driver. So this column removes that 0.257 from every driver and gives us, this column tells us where all the drivers are relative to each other and relative to the fastest driver across Formula 3 in 2024 qualifying, which is Leonardo Fornaroli. So his time, he's the fastest driver, which is interesting. He's only had 2 pole positions, but his gap to pole when he's not on pole is fairly low, whereas some of the other drivers, they might have had a pole position. When they're not on pole, maybe the gap is a bit more. There's a couple of other drivers that are close to him, like Luke Browning is very fast. He's a 10th off. And then a lot of the drivers are a fair way back. But there's some interesting numbers there. And then this is the race pace. Now the race pace is a little bit tricky to calculate, mainly because of the safety cars. However, if there's no safety cars, then it's very easy to calculate the race pace, because you just calculate the amount of laps and divide the finishing position by the amount of laps. For example, if there was a 40 lap race and I'm 40 seconds behind the leader at the end of the race, then 40 divided by 40 equals 1. That means every lap I lose 1 second. Now, without safety cars, it's very easy to calculate race pace. With safety cars, it's a lot more tricky. Now, how these numbers are derived, firstly, as you can see, I've given a higher weighting to feature races. So if you see that the sprint race, the values are calculated twice, the feature race, the values are calculated 4 times. Obviously, the feature race has more prominence. That's why they have a higher weighting. But sometimes it's difficult to calculate because of safety cars. So what we do, we pause the race at that moment just before the safety car comes out. Now this is Formula 3, not Formula 2, so we don't need to worry about pit stops, who has pitted, who hasn't pitted. So we just pause that race. Let's say that there's a 25 lap race. If there's a safety car, comes out on lap 12, just before it comes out we pause it and we calculate where the drivers are relative to each other, and then once we've got the times, we divide that by the number of laps, which is 12, and that's how you get the these numbers. And then if the safety car comes in at the end of lap 14, 25 lap race, there's another 11 green laps. So you might have two numbers, like here for the Melbourne race, obviously there were safety cars, so there's two different numbers. So according to, in one lot of numbers, Alex Dunn is 1.865 seconds behind per lap, behind the fastest driver in one lot, and the other lot he's 1.46. Now the winning driver is Dino Beganovic. As you can see, there's been a safety car, so one of these values is pre-safety car, one of these values is post-safety car. So that's, and then when you average all that out, you get these numbers. Now, Leonardo Fornaroli did not win any races, but in terms of race pace, he is the fastest driver over a lap. Leonardo Fornaroli, let me repeat, was the fastest driver over a lap in FIA Formula 3 2024 across all the races. He didn't win any races, so how is this possible? Well, obviously, when he's not winning, he's close to the driver that is winning, and then when they're not winning, let's say for example, let's say in Melbourne, Dino Beganovic is winning the race, and Fornaroli is on average a bit 0.073 and 0.093 of a second per lap slower than Beganovic. However, in a race like Hungary, Dino Beganovic is a long way off the pace. The winning driver there is Nikola Solov, and per lap Dino Beganovic is 1.279 seconds a lap slower than Nikola Solov in race pace, whereas Leonardo Fornaroli is only 0.158 of a second slower than Solov in race pace in Hungary. So because he's consistently close to the top, then in overall, in average terms, he's the fastest driver. And when you look at these numbers, when you look at the average of the race pace, you get to see who's been quick. So this is actually quite accurate because there are no pit stops in Formula 3. Looking at it, we can see that Leonardo Fornaroli is the fastest driver. The next fastest driver is Arvid Lindblad. That's not a surprise because he won 4 races, but he's got, on average, he's 0.075, so 75 thousandths of a second slower than Leonardo Fornaroli per lap. Someone like Callum Voisin is 0.3 of a second slower than Leonardo Fornaroli per lap over the season on average. Matthias Zagazeta is 1.175 seconds slower than Leonardo Fornaroli over a lap. Some of the other top drivers, for example, Gabriele Mini, he's 0.163. So that's actually a fair margin. Now, so we look at this here, the ultimate. How is the ultimate? Let's call it ultimate pace. Ultimate pace is calculated by averaging the qualifying and the race pace. So you see here on race pace, Alex Dunn is 0.351 seconds per lap slower than Fornaroli, but in qualifying he's 0.555 seconds slower than the fastest driver, which is also Fornaroli. It's not always that the fastest qualifier also has the fastest race pace, but in this instance it is. So this just is, you times this number here by 2 plus this one, and then divide it by 3, which is sort of averaging but giving more weight to the race pace. That's how ultimate pace is calculated. So this is probably the most interesting number here. And then if we just do that, you can see clearly who the driver is and what their speed is. So Alex Dunn on average is 0.419 seconds slower than Leonardo Fornaroli, who happens to be the fastest driver. And this figure here tries to quantify that. What does that mean in terms of a race? Now, this is not a Formula 3 race, because the whole point of Formula 3 is to prepare drivers for Formula 1. On average, Formula 1 does about 60 laps. You can calculate that, right? You can see all the races, how many laps they do. So it's about 60. So this number here is this number times by 60. Or it might be 60.25. I think if you average all the Formula 1 races and divide, it comes to 60.25. So it's about 60 laps. So this means after 60 laps, Leonardo Fornaroli on ultimate pace is winning the theoretical race. Of second would be Gabriele Mini, 8 seconds behind. Third would be Arvid Lindblad. He's almost Luke Browning is 11 seconds, and just behind him, about 0.6 of a second after 60 laps. So NX Slipstream is Lindblad. So these are the 4 fastest drivers over 2023. This is real terms to understand how fast these drivers are actually going. Now, it's sort of expected. If I talk about Gabriele Mini, if I talk about Arvid Lindblad, we're talking about Prema drivers, a couple of other drivers that are fairly close up there, that are within 25 seconds of the leader at the end of the race. We've got Christian Mansell is 16 seconds, and Noel Leon is 19 seconds. I mentioned them in my other video, and that's before I looked at this data. I mentioned that Christian Mansell and Noel Leon had over-delivered, that had really impressed this season, and this data backs that up. And so Christian Mansell is at 16 seconds at the end of a race behind Leonardo Fornaroli, and Noel Leon is 19 seconds behind Leonardo Fornaroli, or 0.321 over the course of a lap. Over a lap he's losing 0.321, but as you can see, that's even quicker than someone like Oliver Goethe, who's a Red Bull Junior, highly rated, and is already in Formula 2. And when you consider that he's with Van Amersfoort and he's had those podiums, that's really an excellent result for him. Whereas someone like Dino Beganovic, as you can see in real terms, over a lap is slower than someone like Christian Mansell. So here you can see it clearly here. Christian Mansell is 0.271 behind Fornaroli. Beganovic in the Prema, almost a tenth of a second behind Mansell. Being a Formula Regional champion, that should be very disappointing for Beganovic. And that, I think that's and he's slower than his teammate, right? He's 2/10 of a second slower over the course of this season than Gabriele Mini, who's his teammate, and he's about a tenth and a half slower than Arvid Lindblad, who's much younger than him. How old is Lindblad? Like I think there's a 3-year age gap between Beganovic and Lindblad, so that's a very poor season from Dino Beganovic. Other drivers here that impress, Nikola Solov, Girtha Strong, Lawrence Van Hoopen is strong. He's had a good season. I know it's not entirely reflected in the results, but he's very strong in the sprint races. But overall, his pace is pretty good. So these are the drivers Luke Browning obviously is very strong. But Luke Browning is expected to be strong. Sami Megatunov, 0.383. That's a good result from him, though this is in direct comparison to his teammate. Whereas some of the more disappointing ones would be Santiago Ramos, more than half a second slower than Fornaroli. So I don't think he can be too happy with that. I know he's a rookie, but it's the same team. Megatunov is doing a better job here. Sebastian Montoya is faster than his results predict. He's about half a second slower than Fornaroli. But he's still slower than Girtha. And you can see some teams, for example, generally slow, like AIX, for example, Susanna Polin for Fuvazak, Josh Newfek, and Nikita Bedrin. They're all a second or more slower than Fornaroli over the course of the season on average. That's quite a lot. Obviously, 1 second a lap in a 60 lap race. 1 second a lap in a 60 lap race is equal to a minute at the end of the race. So that's very poor showing in a spec series by AIX. Now the ultimate table comes here, and this tells you everything you need to know. So this Grand Prix bit is this here, where you just give the Grand Prix is like how fast is this driver over 60 laps compared to, that's what this Grand Prix means. But the most important ones are the qualifying pace, race pace, and overall rank. The overall rank is calculated by the ultimate pace. Now, we can change this table around, of course. So this table is now aligned in according to the qualifying times. And we can see that the fastest qualifier, Fornaroli, second fastest within a tenth of Fornaroli is Gabriele Mini. Luke Browning is close behind, and the fourth fastest qualifier, so that means this guy has a lot of raw pace, is Lawrence Van Hoopen. And it's interesting to see that Van Hoopen is a faster qualifier than Christian Mansell. And I think this is... and it's interesting to see that overall his race pace is not there, but the raw pace in the qualifying is there. Maybe he needs another season to fine-tune his racecraft, and we could see a very strong driver in Lawrence Van Hoopen. Another strong qualifier Nikola Solov, Goethe, Mansell, Ramos is actually a stronger qualifier than Sami Mugatunov. Who'd have thought? So, goes in. Dino Bogdanovic is about a quarter of a second slower than Fornaroli, so he's already losing out in terms of qualifying pace. He's still the 5th fastest qualifier over the season, but that's all. When you compare him to Fornaroli, Mini and Browning, he's not bringing his A game in qualifying. That's part of where he's lost his the championship, if you like. He should be fighting for the championship, and he's not. And obviously that affects your race pace. If you're starting further back, obviously it's not always that easy to overtake cars, so that's going to negatively affect how you go on the races by starting further back. Some other surprises. I find Nikita Bedrin interesting because his qualifying pace is a lot faster than his 2 teammates, Joshua Dufek and Tzanopol Intrafuvasak. His qualifying pace, however, his race pace is the same, as you'll see in a minute. That's why his overall rank is 22 compared to Dufek 24. So that you could interpret that positively for Bedrin, that he's trying to overperform the ultimate pace of that AIX car, and he can do that in qualifying, but he can't overcome the pace deficit of that car in the race. You could interpret it that way. You could probably interpret it a different way, that because he's more experienced at this level than Intrafuvasak and Dufek, maybe he has an advantage in qualifying. I don't really know, but it's obvious to see that in qualifying trim, Nikita Bedrin is a lot faster than his 2 teammates. Another interesting one. Yeah, Arvid Lindblad is outside of the top 10 in qualifying, so that means that he needs to fine-tune his qualifying performances. Now, if we do this again, get out. Now this is based on race pace, and as we can see, some drivers that weren't such good qualifiers have jumped up, but the fastest driver overall is Fornaroli. Again, he's closely followed by Lindblad in the race pace. Mini is up there, and then Mansell is 4th ahead of Luke Browning, so that's very good from him. Noel Leon is in 6th. So this final table shows the ultimate pace. We can go through each driver. The fastest driver for ultimate pace as well as quality and race pace is Fornaroli. There's a gap of almost 1.5 seconds to Gabriele Mini. That's quite a substantial gap at this level. You have to ask drivers in Formula 1, how do you find 0.136 seconds? And they're like, oh, it's hard to find that. So I know it's not a lot of time though, 0.136 seconds, but for in racing terms it is a decent gap. And then close behind Mini is Luke Browning and Arvid Lindblad. I want to mention that Arvid Lindblad is very young, so chance for him to get faster compared to the other drivers Then there's a gap between Lindblad and Mansell. But Mansell, even in the ART, is 5th quickest. I think that's a very good job. Noel Leon is 6th fastest driver over the course of the season, 0.32 seconds behind Fornaroli. The fact both of these drivers are ahead of Beganovic is excellent for them. Oliver Goethe has been very consistent. Even if you look here, quali pace and race pace, almost identical gaps to Fornaroli. So that's quite amazing. It's like 0.36 versus 0.367. Then Sami Megatunov, a little bit slow in quali, tends to make up for it in the races. Lawrence Van Hoopen very close to Sami Megatunov, but needs to improve his race pace. Solov's in 11th, which is a bit of a surprise. He's very quick in the second half of the season, but still within 0.385 of Fornaroli. Notice how it's really tight here. Sami Megatunov 0.382, Van Hoopen 0.383, Solov 0.385, and then Alex Dunn has done reasonably. He's 0.4. Not bad for MP. Tim Tramnitz is right next to him. He's the other MP. Yeah, so that's not a bad effort from Tramnitz and Dunn. Callum Voisin, not bad for Roden. 0.4 seconds. 0.463. Sebastian Montoya, 15th. Again, he's quite fast, but he struggles to bring the positions home. He's involved in a lot of incidents. Santiago Ramos in 16th. Will be very disappointed with that, driving for Trident. Mari Boyer, very disappointing season. Stenson is disappointing. Esterson, not too bad. He's only had 2 points finishes, but his speed is decent considering he's driving the Genza. Joseph Loke, not as far behind Callum Voisin in terms of speed. Oh, yeah, it's half a second. It's a surprise. I don't know. See, Roden are not the best team in F3. Loke was the runner-up in the GB3 Championship in 23. You'd expect him to be a bit faster. 21 is Matthias Zagazeta. Not bad for Genza. I think their car was okay this year anyway, but he's quite a good qualifier. 0.65 off the fastest driver. 0.65 is not bad for Genza, but Bedrin is a good qualifier. He'll be a bit disappointed with his results, but his qualifying is excellent considering he's in the AIX, probably the worst team on the grid. Sophia Flörsch, didn't score any points, but she's not that slow. but about a second off per lap. Dufek, not too bad considering he's only scored 1 point. AIX is the worst car. Shane Shields, very disappointing from him. Intrafuvazak, he's had some sloppy and slow races. Kash Pastuka, the F4 champion, will be very disappointed. Tommy Smith is where you'd expect. Piotr Wisniewski, 1.4 seconds per lap slower than Leonardo Fornaroli. Slowest driver, very disappointing, is Charlie Wirtz. He would have expected to be higher. But this is the breakdown of the speed over the course of the season. It's all there. These numbers tell you the full story, and I hope you've enjoyed analysing them.